Welcome back to another episode of the American Man Podcast. I'm here with my son Elijah, and we are still going through the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Say hello, Elijah.
Hello.
All right, so we are on the Eighth Amendment, and why don't you go ahead and read the Eighth Amendment for us?
Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted.
All right, so let's start with the excessive bail. Do you know what bail is?
Money that has to be paid to be let out of jail and stuff.
Yeah, so when you get arrested, you're in jail, but you haven't been tried yet. There hasn't been a trial. And so you're waiting for the trial. And, back then, and we've already gone through the amendment that said, a speedy trial. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And one reason was because back then, they were worried about the government putting you in jail, but not having a trial for years and years and years, effectively punishing you without finding you guilty.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is similar, and it protected against innocent people being thrown in jail on, trumped up charges, and the judge saying, well, you can't get out unless you post bail of, $1 million or something that, is excessive, something that you couldn't afford. Because what it's doing is it's effectively punishing you whether you're guilty or not, because you can't get out of jail until your trial.
Mm-hmm.
And so bail is important. Now, some people shouldn't be let out on bail. If you are, a violent criminal and you've, committed a crime and it's reasonably likely that you did it, if there's a lot of evidence that you did it, there are times when excessive bail is appropriate. If they think that there's a high chance that you're gonna flee the country,
Mm-hmm.
while you're waiting for trial, they will pose a relatively high bail. And all that it means is it's kind of like you give them this money while you're out, and then if you don't show up to your trial, then you forfeit the money, but you get the money back if you show up,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're guilty or not. It's sort of like security. It's sort of a promise that you're going to show up for the trial,
Mm-hmm.
is what bail is. So yeah, they were concerned again about the government imposing this huge amount of money that no one could afford, simply to stay out of jail before the trial started. So then we have nor excessive fines imposed. So again, at the core of all of this, what are they really worried about?
Um, like injustice on someone who may not even be guilty and stuff.
And even if
And
someone is guilty of maybe a minor thing, they were concerned about the government imposing, some harsh punishment just because they didn't like you,
mm-hmm.
right? So that was the issue that they're trying to avoid. So then we get to the last one, which is we're going to spend the most time on this. Nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Okay, so think back to some of those medieval books that you were reading, right? What are some of the punishments that they did to people?
Sometimes I don't want to even talk about them.
Yeah, pretty bad, right?
Yeah.
Pretty horrific. Like they tortured people to death through a variety of ways. Really painful, terrible, horrible ways of killing people, and or hurting them or branding them, and all these different things, right? And so the founding fathers were, and again, that we're looking at this from a group of people who, read the Bible, believed in God, um, were mostly Christian, or at least motivated by Christian values. And they didn't want to, have this cruelty. And now, what's interesting, or how that's been interpreted over the years, is very different now than how it was thought of back then. Um, so let's go through some of the punishments, common punishments in 1776, which is not when this was ratified, but when the Declaration of Independence. So same colonial time, Revolutionary War, when we broke away from England. So we have flogging or whipping. Okay. Um, so when's the last time you heard of someone being flogged for stealing or doing something?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, you've never seen it here in the United States. We don't whip people anymore,
No,
right?
never.
How about the stocks or the pillory?
I've heard of those for sure. I heard they were used a lot in like medieval times.
Yeah, medieval times, and in 1776 there were people that were put in pillories or stocks. Um, and the reason you put someone in those, I mean, first it was very uncomfortable, but it was a public spectacle, right? And everyone walking past could see that you did something wrong and that you were being punished for it. Um, so we have now determined, over the even though that was common back then, the courts have determined over the years that more and more things are cruel and unusual, right? And for example, nowadays courts have held that you can't even publicly shame someone. Now, a court can sometimes order an apology or something like that, but there were cases where the court said that the person should have to wear a sign and walk around saying I stole money from my boss or something like that, and court said no, that's cruel and unusual because the only point is to humiliate. And my opinion, I actually think that the courts have gone too far in what is considered cruel and unusual.
Do you think you could give me like
Some examples?
yeah.
Yeah, so I think that, one of the things that maybe it's important to step back and ask, why do we punish people?
Because they did a bad thing.
Well, they did a bad thing. Okay. Does punishing them stop them from doing that thing? They've already done it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are different reasons why we have justice or criminal justice and punishment. And one of those reasons is what we call deterrence. And there's two kinds of deterrence. There's specific deterrence. In other words, if I punish you for doing something, you're probably not going to do it again. Or at least you're hopefully not going to do it again because you're scared of that punishment again, right? There's what we call general deterrence, which is essentially society seeing you getting punished and other people who are tempted to do that same bad thing saying, oh, I see what happened to him. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to be punished.
Mm-hmm.
So deterrence is one of the major reasons why we have punishment, so that it deters people from committing crimes in the future.
Mm-hmm.
There's also an idea of what's called restitution or restoring. And that is when we're talking about excessive fines and fees and penalties and things like that. You're trying to make the victim whole again. So if you commit a crime and someone's leg gets broken, you should have to pay for the pain, the medical bills, the pain and suffering, and things like that. If you steal money, you should pay restitution, restoring the person back to what you stole. So part of our punishment is based on restitution. Part of it is based on what we call rehabilitation. And that is if you are in prison for 3 or 4 years, maybe, hopefully during that time you can learn more, you can grow up, you can mature, and you can be restored to a better member of society, someone who is less likely to commit crimes. For whatever reason you committed the crime, hopefully you can be taught or rehabilitated Now, a lot of it comes down to what kind of crime you committed. If you stole because you were poor and you didn't have enough money to buy food, or the car that you wanted or something like that, then we're going to talk about some different types of punishment for that. And first of all, we want to deter you from doing that again. And we also want you to restore the victim, give the car back or pay for the car if it was damaged. We also want to rehabilitate you. So hopefully you can learn some skills or things like that when you're in prison. But we also have this common idea of justice, right? If there is a wrong, if something has been, if a wrong has been committed, it would not be just for it to go unpunished, right? So I think that where we have gone too far in ways of letting people out, or saying things are cruel and unusual, really has to do with, in my opinion, the death penalty. Because here's a list of things. It's called capital punishment. Capital punishment is the death penalty. And here's a list of some of the capital crimes from 1776. Again, these are things that they would not have batted an eye. These would not have been considered cruel and unusual to give someone the death penalty for some of the following crimes. There's murder, rape, robbery, or theft, depending on the value. If it was a high value, we've seen cowboy movies and things where people who were horse thieves or barn burners and things like that, and they say, string them up. That was not uncommon. Arson, burning down houses.
What is arson?
Arson is when you intentionally burn something down. Typically, it has to do with fire. So burning down buildings, things like that. There was treason, desertion from the military. If you quit the army without permission, you could be hanged. And so, now they didn't always impose the death sentence on all of those things, but it was not uncommon. It was not considered unusual at all. But over time, our courts have said, well, we shouldn't give someone capital punishment for stealing a horse, or nowadays stealing a car. And I think some of that is right. We shouldn't put so much value on property that we're killing people over property. I don't think that's what the Bible teaches. And I don't think that's what our civil code should or our criminal code, I should say, should impose. But there are some things that still people are not punished. For example, a lot of murders don't get the death sentence. In some states, it's considered illegal. Rape or crimes against children that they've said you can't sentence someone to death for those things. And I think we've seen the issues where it's no longer a deterrence. You're not going to get capital punishment for that, so it's more likely to occur. Now, there were reasons why capital punishment became less and less, I'll say, popular or more suspect. And a lot of those reasons had to do with some legitimate concerns. For example, do you think that, how certain should we be when we're saying this person should be executed? How sure should we be that they committed the crime?
100%.
100%. Yeah, and that's really hard to do even today. Now, it's easier to do today, and maybe we can never get to 100%, but we can get to 99.999%. We can do a lot better job today. However, there was for a long time a lot of people who were charged with these crimes.
Only like 70%?
Well, it's they were charged on things like eyewitness testimony, where someone said, "Oh yeah, I saw that guy running away from the scene of the crime, but it was dark out and it was hard to see, or the person was hard of bad sight," things like that. A lot of people were convicted and executed. Now, I can't say that they were all innocent either. Maybe they did. But we have learned through a lot of studies that a lot of those testimonies and a lot of those um, forms of evidence really were not reliable at all. So I think that it's really important to balance, when we're considering taking a life, right? That's ultimately what this is. We have to balance how sure are we that we have the right person. Um, and, there was also a lot of um, bias in people in the juries and things like that.
What is
Um,
bias?
so back right after this, slavery was ended, but there was a lot of racism towards
Mhm.
African American people, or Indian people, or Jewish people, or fill in the blank. If there was if there was a minority group and people didn't like them, they were more likely to be tried and found guilty and hanged or killed.
Mhm.
Um, and that was a problem. Nowadays, we do have a lot more evidence. So we have DNA testing, which is, you find little bits of a person's, molecular structure at a crime. And we can pinpoint, was that person there? Was that person the one holding the gun?
Fingerprints.
Fingerprinting has come a long way. We've got video cameras everywhere now. Everyone has cell phones. We have a lot more, surveillance cameras. We can track vehicles and who those vehicles belong to and things like that. So there's just a lot more certainty available to us. So I am of the opinion that we've gone too far and too soft in some of our punishment, particularly crimes against children, crimes against women, and crimes where you are truly destroying or changing someone's life forever, even if it's not murder. You are ultimately destroying someone's life, and I think that as long as we have the evidence, I don't think there's anything cruel or unusual about the death penalty, and I'm pretty sure the founding fathers would agree with that. So, are there any other crimes or punishments or things like that you have questions about?
No.
No? All right. So, again, why do we have punishments to begin with? There's a lot of different reasons, and it's important to try to make sure that the forms of punishment fit the forms of crime, and that we're consistent with it. There's a lot of problems with our criminal justice system that we'll get into on another podcast. But that's what the amendment says. And so there we go. There's the eighth